And just as we go along through tonight, just put any questions or comments in the chat. That'd be fantastic. So welcome everybody. My name's Paul Kelly. For those of you who've heard this speech before, I apologise, but I am the director of Breaking Ground, which is the new community-led housing hub for the Liverpool City region. And we launched on Saturday, having this festival exploring all sorts of options around community-led housing. And tonight, I'm really, really pleased to have Seasalt from Brighton, who are going to talk about their student housing co-op. I heard them do this talk a few weeks ago now and was really blown away by both the context of why they're doing what they're doing, but also the ambition that they've got for their project and what they're doing. And again, in a city like Liverpool, which has had such a history of housing co-ops, to not have a student housing co-op yet here, I think is something we need to address through the hub. So I'm really, really pleased that they've are able to take part tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Matt, who is going to lead their presentation, and then we'll have time for questions with them. Fantastic. Over to you, Matt.
Actually, it's Tom. I'm going to be leading, but we look similar. It's fine. Okay, if I just share my screen. Can you all see the presentation? Good. Okay, so welcome to Seasalt Housing Cooperative. And our talk is about community-led housing and young people, the Seasalt story. And that's with me, Tom Green, and also...
Hi, my name is Sim.
And hello, my name is Matt.
Cool. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover, first of all, we're going to talk about a brief background on land use and the housing market here in the UK. So we're going to look at who owns England, the UK housing market, and then the issues that student housing faces in the UK. We'll then move on to what motivated us to get started and sort of the journey of Seasalt. Then we'll go through our vision, why we chose the co-op model and what our aims are in our student housing co-op. We'll then look at what the key challenges have been when we've been trying to set up student housing co-op in Brighton. And then we'll cover a brief sort of history and timeline of events, what we've been doing, how we got here. And then we'll move on to what we're doing now and what our plans are for this year and beyond. So, first of all, let's talk about land use and the housing market in the UK. And as always, the first thing we have to talk about when we're looking at land use and housing here is who owns England and how much they own. So, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's a land registry in the UK. It basically maps out all the land, who owns it and how much they own, draws all the boundaries, but it's incomplete and it's not open access. And there have been quite a few attempts over the years to make it open access and to complete it, but these have all been largely failures. So this means that land ownership data is very difficult to actually uncover and to map. So this is a map from Who Owns England, and you can visit their website, whoownsengland.org, and it basically shows you who owns the land in the UK. So you can see in light red, you have estates and sort of aristocracy. Red, dark red is offshore companies. Purple is the Crown Estate. And then in green, you have like the Forestry Commission, National Trust, nature reserves, all that kind of stuff. And we've helpfully labelled sort of our area in the southeast in blue with Seasalt, and then up northwest with the Liverpool City region. And just to give you a quick overview of this is the type of thing you might see if you were to go and have a look at the northwest and the Liverpool City region, and what type of land ownership climate you have up here. So despite this, what we do know, and from what we can ascertain, is that 0.5% of the population own roughly half of England's land. So the left-hand side graphic shows that the orange is 0.5% of the population, and the blue is everyone else. So half of England is owned by a very small percentage of people, and that's illustrated again in the Guardian article on the right. So this means that only 5% of our land in the UK belongs to homeowners. Much more belongs to new money, so bankers, financiers, people from the city. 18% belongs to companies, and that includes overseas companies and offshore registered companies. 30%, a whopping amount, belongs to aristocracy and gentry. So much of this will be passed down generationally and kept in families for generations. So the key point is not much land in the UK is actually allocated for homeowners and housing. So from this, we can take that wealth and land are concentrated in the hands of a privileged few people. So what does this mean for housing and home ownership here in the UK? So in 2003, that's when home ownership actually hit a peak of 71%, and this meant the owner-occupied housing. So we're talking about people that live in a house, own the house that they live in. However, most publicly owned land had already been sold off since the 1980s, and since 2003, home ownership has now sunk to a 30-year low. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Huffington Post suggests that this mass sell-off of public land is driving the housing crisis, and this is something we'll come on to in a minute. So why might home ownership have sunk to such a low since 2003? So there are many theories, and one of them is that housing developers buy up and own lots of land and often sit on undeveloped land. So this is a relatively new theory, and it still has tentative evidence. So they're still looking into this with who owns England. But essentially, what they suggest is that housing developers will buy land, wait for it to increase in value, and then sell it on without actually building any houses. So a lot of land might be left unused and just sold on for profit. There are also 750,000 property millionaires in the UK, and these are mostly concentrated in London and the southeast. And the question you have to ask is this fair when many people can't afford to buy or purchase a house, and many of these property millionaires will be wealthy landowners or landlords with a large property portfolio. And again, this illustrates that economic and wealth divide, as you can see, because obviously in London and the southeast, we have a much higher percentage of property millionaires compared to, say, you guys up in the northwest, where there's only about 12,000. So this means that house prices are currently at record highs. House prices in the UK are at record highs, and house prices relative to earnings are also at record highs. So this means that a lot of housing in this country is unaffordable and unobtainable for a lot of people. However, house building is actually at its lowest for over 50 years. So as we talked about, with the mass sell-off of public land in the 1980s, this contributed to a complete plummet in the green here of local authority house building. And you can see also in the blue and red, private house building and housing associations also took a plummet in the 80s, and these took a more significant plummet more recently, leading up to 2010. So this means that we see sort of a lack of housing supply and a lack of housing stock in many areas of the country, which might help to drive up house prices, as we just saw. So we have a lack of affordable house building in the UK, with 1.1 million people on the waiting list. And you can see that on the right-hand side, the graphic shows the percentage of affordable homes. So where we're located in the southeast, and if you look at London as well, you can see that between 0 and only 10% of houses are actually classed as affordable. Now, in our context, in the terms of renting, affordable housing, I think, is classed as 80% of sort of the market average rent-wise. So only about 10% of houses are meeting that value. And even up in the northwest, you're sort of seeing a similar story. Between, say, 10 and 30% of houses are actually classed as affordable, which isn't very many at all. So this means that we have a housing crisis affecting an estimated 8.4 million people in the UK. So the BBC says an estimated 8.4 million people in England are living in an unaffordable, insecure, or unsuitable home, according to the National Housing Federation. And people face issues such as overcrowded housing or being unable to afford their rent or mortgage. So a lot of people on low incomes are stuck in unsuitable and unsustainable housing situations because of this housing crisis. So if we were to talk about our context, and we're looking at young people and students, we can see a generational divide in home ownership, and younger generations are between 10 and 25% less likely to own a house at the same age as their counterparts. So from this graph, you can see people born in the 1990s in blue are much less likely to own a house at the age of 25 compared to people born in the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s. So this means that young people are much more likely to rent and live in rented accommodation. However, renting is also very expensive, and the cost of renting has also risen much faster than incomes. So even though young people are renting a lot more, this doesn't mean that they're living in anything that might be considered affordable. So to sum this all up is a quote from the Duke of Westminster and his advice to young entrepreneurs. And his name's Hugh Grosvenor, and I think he's got a net worth of around £9.5 billion. I think he's the richest landowner in the UK. But his advice to these young entrepreneurs was this. He said, make sure you have an ancestor who was a very, very close friend of William the Conqueror. And I think that's quite a funny quote because it sums up the kind of generational passing down of land in the UK and his sort of attitudes and opinions towards how land and wealth should be passed on. So what are the problems then with student accommodation in particular? So as we mentioned, a lot of students are renting. In fact, 56% of students live in what we consider private rented accommodation. So that's here in blue with a private landlord, or on the cyan in private halls. Another 27% will live in university managed accommodation. So that will be like university halls, usually in their sort of first year of university. Only 12% live with their parents, and only 3% own their own property, and roughly 2% live in something else. So that could be like a housing co-op, like we're trying to set up. So not many people live in a housing co-op. Most people are stuck renting with private landlords. However, most students are paying an extortionate price for this, and the average price students pay in the UK is £126 per week to live in private rented accommodation. And that rises to a whopping £150 per week average rent in the southeast and London, which is definitely not affordable and definitely very unobtainable for many low-income students. At Seasalt, we're aiming to charge approximately 80% of what we consider the market average in Brighton, which is £105 a week. So we hope that this is considered affordable, and we can do this because as a housing co-op, we only have to pay sort of our principal costs. So we only pay for mortgage / lease. We only have to pay insurance, and we have to pay off our investors. We don't have to pay a private landlord or fund a private landlord's lifestyle, so we can charge a much lower rent price. And just looking at Brighton in particular, we can see that the average Brighton home costs 16 times the average salary. So in Brighton, the housing market is extremely expensive and extremely unaffordable and unattainable for most people. So what this means is it would take you about 16 years before you were able to afford a mortgage if you were to earn the average salary in Brighton, which obviously, students don't have 16 years to wait to do their degree. So I think this illustrates the sort of broken and unaffordable housing market we see down in Brighton. So what are the top 5 problems with student accommodation? So number 1 is affordability. So as we previously discussed, the average rent price is £126 a week UK wide and £150 southeast. So this means that many students, in particular those that we see on low incomes, can't afford this, and they spend most of their loan or tuition fee on their rent. Landlords are often investing in large property portfolios, and therefore they're using their houses as rent and profit-making machines. They have a lot of power to sort of hike rents year on year. So a lot of student housing is unaffordable. However, if you move on to point 2, most student housing is actually very poor quality. So we've seen far too many horror stories of student housing including things like mold, mushrooms growing on the wall, broken appliances. I think there was a recent case from Acorn, the union, where they dealt with a client who had an oven that would catch fire when they turned it on to use it. And the fire brigade came around, and they said to her, look, if you had left this 10 more minutes, it would have caused a serious fire. But her landlord was refusing to do anything, to engage, to listen, to actually fix the problem. So she got Acorn involved. Another colleague I used to work with moved into his new flat, and he came into work the next day and he said, oh, by the way, I moved in, it was all good, but there was no window in my room. And everyone was like, what do you mean there was no window? And he said, well, there was no glass in the window pane. So he emailed the letting agents and they said, oh yeah, sorry, we forgot to fix the window. We'll come do that soon. And that just illustrates the kind of state and the quality of housing that students are getting. And that links back to point one. You know, they're paying £150 a week. They should expect a much better value for money and quality from their housing. Another issue is precarious contracts. So most students will be on sort of university term, so they'll have a sort of 10-month to 1-year contract. This means they have no real stability, no sense of belonging. There's no incentive for students to invest in sort of long-term possessions, and there's no incentive for landlords to invest in quality housing either, because the students are moving out at the end of the year. They can just bring in new tenants. It also means that landlords and letting agents have a lot of power. They have a short-term contract. They're free to get rid of people pretty much when they want. And that moves on to point 4, which is the undemocratic nature on most student housing. So most students will be renting from these landlords and letting agents that have a monopoly on the market in sort of Brighton and Hove. But they don't actually have a say on how their accommodation is run, what goes in their tenancy agreement, what happens with their rent, how often things get fixed, how quickly things get fixed. Things that are specific to students might include, you know, can we have posters on the wall? What if we put blue tack on that kind of stuff? And it gives landlords and letting agents a lot of power to evict people really easily. There's a lot of student contracts that contain very strange clauses, hidden fees, and that kind of stuff. And there's also no real chance for students to upgrade their house or to make it more environmentally friendly, which brings us on to point 5 of poor environmental standards. So I think a lot of housing in this country in general, but particular student housing, doesn't have good standards. So think poor retrofitting, which means low quality appliances, less insulation, perhaps not double glazing windows, etc. And students are very much powerless to control their own environmental impact, which we'll come on to in a minute. So here we just have 3 examples of some issues that typical students might face. So on the left, 1 in 3 students haven't read their accommodation contract. And I think this partly stems from 2 things. So the first issue is that there's a lack of education around tenancy agreements and housing for young students. A lot of them are moving out from home for the first time. They're very unaware of all the issues of housing and what to do. So many of them feel overwhelmed and daunted by reading their contract. And the second issue is, as I previously mentioned, there's a lot of hidden clauses, nasty clauses often included in student contracts. So many students get put off from trying to do something about these issues because they have a fear of repercussion from their landlord or letting agent. So a lot of students, I think, just don't bother and just try and get by with what they have. And second one, obviously, high rent prices, which we've already discussed, very expensive. And the last one is a little bit misleading because it says 14% of UK students have struggled to get their deposit back. In actual fact, I think this figure is a lot larger, but in the survey, I think they were talking about students that really fail to actually get their deposit back in the long term. So what this means is most students, or in my experience and our experience, a lot of students will have a situation at the end of the year where the landlord will email them and say, you've scratched the sink or something, I'm taking all your deposit. And they send back an email saying, this is ridiculous, whatever. And then the landlord will back down and say, oh, sorry, I apologize. So most students, after sort of 1 email back and forth, will actually get their deposit back. So it's a lot more students have the kind of landlords trying to take advantage of the situation, but only 14% really struggle. And my last point that we come on to is the sustainability of student housing. So on the left, we have one of our sustainability posters that we designed to try and encourage students to think about whether their accommodation was green and really try and take control of their sustainability. And on the right, we have the logo for the Green Renters campaign. And that was set up after Sim did research for her final year dissertation. And some of her senior lecturers realized after her research that nothing was being done about the sustainability and carbon efficiency of student accommodation. Because if you think about our aims and visions as a country of reaching net zero emissions, housing stock plays a very big role in this, I think. And in particular, student housing often gets overlooked in the debate of how we become a carbon neutral country. And so the Green Renters campaign was set up, and it's spearheaded by our local MP, Caroline Lucas. And it aims to encourage landlords and letting agents across the city to take advantage of national green initiatives such as the Green Homes Grant to really improve the environmental standards and energy efficiency of student housing in Brighton and Hove. So we are different to all of this. We're trying to address these problems, and we are proud to be a co-op, and that's what makes us different, really. Okay.
That's me.
Yep.
I was just popping something in the chat for an event that Green Renters are doing right now. And it's really cool to be able to work with other local student housing organisations who will do slightly different things, like working on student housing sustainability or affordable rent campaigns, tenants unions. Yeah, and just to say that in our local context, we have a lot of contacts and are able to be, I guess, a more powerful voice when we work together. Okay, so getting on to this, what motivated us at Seasalt to get started? Slide, please. So there were a couple of things that motivated us to get started. But really what I want to present to you is the fact that we knew that there was an alternative out there. So in the top left, you've got a picture of myself back in 2015 or 16 and some friends. And back then we were part of a bicycle cooperative, a student bicycle cooperative. And the general thing that we did was we took abandoned bicycles across campus, fixed them up over the holidays, and let them out to students during the year. All done not for profit, done with kind of bicycle confidence workshops and bicycle maintenance workshops. And I literally got involved quite accidentally. I needed a bicycle, they were around, and I didn't quite realise that when I joined them as a member, that being a member of a co-op means that you're now on the committee, you help make decisions, you go to meetings. And so that was really an eye-opening experience for me. I think lots of people find their journeys into co-op through slightly random, indirect routes. But once I got involved with them, I also got involved with Students for Cooperation on the top right. And they are the National Students Federation of Student Cooperatives. They're less active at the moment, but they were when I was first getting involved. And I guess the cooperative model really stood out to me. The principles behind it, the motivations for people really setting them up. You know, these are organisations that set up really to meet the needs of the local community, whatever that is. And on campus we have bicycle, food, and now a housing co-op. Something that was quite a driver in us setting up was one of the SU officers in the top left corner, her name's Lindsay. One of the SU officers had it on her manifesto that she wanted to help and set one up. And I guess through that student union support, it became a lot easier for us to do so. So we ran an info event about 3 years ago. It would have been in February. And I showed up to that. I was, I'll be honest, procrastinating from writing my undergraduate dissertation. But it meant that I could go along to an interesting event. And yeah, I heard from people who were part of other student housing co-ops, and I spoke to the local community land trust who supported us, and it came together. It looked like a thing that we could do. And of course, at this point, I had experienced everything that Tom's just been talking about, relating to kind of poor experiences with student housing, having problems with getting my deposit back, like just a really high demand for housing in the local area. And that meaning that landlords can sort of take advantage of students, generally being the sort of younger, less aware demographic, because they're sort of newer to the housing market. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, it has been a journey over the last 3 years. We have, I don't know what to talk about here. In the top left, I like that picture in the grass. That's a picture of us visiting South Downs Eco, who are a housing co-op up in the South Downs. And there's something there about like the amount of support and advice and just friendship, I guess, from local housing co-ops. So this was just on a volunteer day. Some of us from Seasalt went up and did some gardening for them with a scythe. Yeah, which I guess has just meant that we felt really supported in setting up and like practical advice on things to do. We've been featured in our local campus newspaper. The fancy picture of us on the steps is when we were nominated for a student award at the university. That's our group of us going there. Yeah, just generally, I think I've talked enough about what has motivated us. Okay, next slide, please.
This, yeah, is my part. So our vision and why we did choose the co-op model. Next slide, please. So as I can see from the chat, there are some of you who are very kind of well versed in the whole co-op idea, and I may be preaching a little bit to the choir at times with that, so I apologize in advance. But when I kind of explain to you what our vision is, these 6 kind of key principles of co-ops are quite a helpful guide. Thank you, Tom. So with regards to quality, lots of landlords, lots of students do have a landlord horror story. And seeing the chat, Mariangela's story about a student falling through their ceiling, I believe it was. These are quite common things. I'm a law graduate, and in my last year of university, I worked within the housing law clinic. And one of the cases that I tackled was a disrepair case that was quite similar, involving a student whose house had damp that built up so much that the ceiling caved in. As it was pointed out, this is not just confined to students. All different people suffer these kind of issues. However, as Sim said, students are kind of perceived to be more clueless when it comes to these kind of things, and are therefore tend to be a bit more vulnerable to being taken advantage of by landlords. I'll repair this in a bit, effectively. So often paying sub-average rent means that you are consigned to substandard property, and the only viable alternative to that is paying beyond your means. And this isn't surprising, because property, it's a business at the end of the day. And with a forecast of 3.5 houses demanded for every house that's actually built between 2019 and 2030 being forecast by the UK Student Housing Report, landlords have the ability to charge more for less. That's the reality of the system that we live in. So being propelled by the community rather than one figurehead's profit means that in a co-op like Seasalt, property maintenance is in the hands of the very people who run the cooperative. There are no middlemen. Next slide, please. So affordable housing, the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative, which was launched in 2014, provides rent, as you can see from the graphic, at £170 cheaper per month than the average Edinburgh rent. And I think that's kind of a good reflection on the difference that the cooperative model can provide as an alternative to the kind of mainstream. But this does require caution though, as in 2020, we had to reject property that was offered to us because it was being used as bedsits for vulnerable people. In making property affordable, extra care has to be taken to ensure that you don't remove freedom from others who equally need that property. Next slide, please. So the community element of the cooperative is something that's really intrinsic to it, and something that as a co-op I can definitely say that we're really proud of. Looking kind of at property as that kind of community resource can serve as a viable alternative to the current idea of property being that kind of individualistic resource that's been able to be banked by richer people. As Tom so eloquently said, having a friend who was an ancestor of William the Conqueror does really help, and it quite frankly shouldn't be that way. So the first photo to the left is Seasalt in one of its first general meetings. I think that Sim will nod if I'm correct with that, but I do believe that it is one of the first general meetings that we had. And this is Seasalt at its inception. And the middle is May 2019. And the last one is, as you can tell from our super trendy masks that we're wearing, is August 2020. So the point of this, as you can see from the slide, is that Seasalt has changed a lot, and there are benefits and drawbacks to this. The benefits are that you can see how the idea has spread. There are some people like Sim who have consistently stayed throughout, but the different people in these photos shows the message of student housing cooperatives. It has the ability to move from person to person through these different incarnations of Seasalt. But there does carry a challenge in that when you change membership on a semi-regular basis, the transience of that membership means that it's tough to have new people, it means that membership's tough because lots of new people have to kind of gain that experience and understand the system. However, the cooperative message and the cooperative system, we believe at least, has enough power in it that it is able to do that. It's able to carry over from generation to generation. Next slide, please. So democracy, as we have mentioned beforehand, students do often lack knowledge of the fine details when renting property. And that means that they are more vulnerable to being taken advantage of. But in contrast, being part of a democratically framed housing cooperative, it means that by its very nature, everyone has a voice. No one is being swindled or outmaneuvered because there's simply no opportunity for that to happen. Everyone has the same power and is sharing the same experiences that feeds into that community element. Therefore, we're contrasting the landlord system in that there's a more level playing field through avoiding ideas such as hierarchies that are often the sources of the power imbalances in the landlord-tenant relationship. If you have an equal relationship with your landlord, they can't tell you that nothing's going to be done about your floor caving in, because I have a feeling that a couple of people are probably going to have something to say about that. Next slide, please. Education. In partnership with the Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, we've raised just over £300,000 for our share offer, which means that this house can be leased to us through the Community Land Trust, and through that we're able to spread our philosophy, Seasalt having a home. The benefits of this is that when you have a house like that, you're able to teach students life skills to maintain their own accommodation, and that can be a really valuable tool in feeling more ownership and connection with your property. Even something as small as learning to change a light bulb can be a small step towards making the space that you live in truly yours. And that associates with the overall message of having a community of place, a space through which you can call your own. Contrasting that, if you're not even allowed to put blue tack on your walls, how can you truly feel that space is yours? If you don't own a property, then this kind of stuff will maybe seem boring. But knowing about things like non-hierarchical decision-making processes, methods through which property can become sustainable, and local housing markets become interesting because they directly affect you. Next slide, please. Spreading Seasalt's message throughout the community and educating others on the benefits of co-ops has brought us new allies, such as MPs Caroline Lucas and Lloyd Russell Moyle, who are displayed there in the lovely circular photographs. We've also forged relationships displayed within the slide, like Chibba, which is competent housing in Brighton and Hove, and the People's Postcode Lottery. And these prominent organisations and people show us one key thing, that although we represent an alternative in how to look at property, the concept of cooperatives just has immense potential to gain mainstream appeal. The bottom left photo that we have here is when Seasalt spoke to around 100 students at University of Sussex Fresh Affair on the subject of housing co-ops. The top left is us meeting with the Birmingham Student Housing Co-op. The bottom right photograph is the Co-op Connections event, which was organised by Co-ops UK in Brighton, and we just had the opportunity to meet with some local co-ops. The top right is us meeting local co-ops at a social in Brighton. So the network of people that we have been able to contact with the Seasalt idea is just fantastic, and it's something that we're really, really proud of. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we've identified 3 key challenges that we've encountered along our journey setting up Seasalt.
It's just a bit hard to hear you, Tom. Sorry.
Is this better?
That's better. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry. So yeah, so we've identified 3 key challenges that we've encountered trying to set up Seasalt over our journey. So number 1 is that there are no local templates for student housing co-ops in Brighton, although we did have sort of plenty of initial allies. So one point I'd like to make is that in a sort of traditional housing co-op, you usually will run a share offer, and you'll run that yourself as the co-op, and you purchase the house yourself. But when you're a student housing co-op, you will usually lease your house from an external organisation. So in our case, that's BHCLT, Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust. And this means that you need to have potential allies who can help you run your financing and get your project off the ground. So in Brighton, there are quite a few co-ops. We had everything from sustainable food co-ops like Infinity Foods, all the way to sort of energy service co-ops. And we also have housing co-ops. But there were no student housing co-ops before we set up Seasalt. So we didn't have a template to go on. We had no one who had partnered with an external organization. Well, we had no example of a student housing co-op who had partnered with an external organization to run a lease, to run a share offer, and to purchase a house before. We did have plenty of friends around the country, so you can see Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op, and they're an excellent example of a great template of how a student housing co-op should be. So point 2 is the responsibilities of managing and being part of a dynamic and progressive organisation such as us. So I think when we first started, a lot of the skills that we needed or that we wanted were important for setting up a student housing co-op. We didn't actually have. So although we had a diverse group of people who came from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different degree disciplines, there were a lot of skills that we needed to learn along the way. So everything from sort of graphic design, web design, social media marketing, all the way to things like negotiating a lease, running a share offer, buying a house, writing all of the documentation that goes with that. These are all skills that we needed to learn along the way. So I think one of the things that you need to take into account when you first set up a student housing co-op or any co-op is that you might not necessarily have all of the skills needed to do it. So don't be put off by that. Don't be daunted by that. I think it's important that you embrace these challenges and try and learn as many skills as you can along the way. And number 3 is that our house, we wanted our house to be affordable, but we didn't want to use existing housing stock that would be suitable for disadvantaged groups. So this quote from Brighton Hove Community Land Trust in the Financial Times basically says, there are thousands of individuals and families trapped in unsuitable housing situations because of the disastrous disconnect between wages and average house prices and rents in the city. So clearly, there's a lot of disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged groups in Brighton, people on low incomes, homeless people, all people like that who need affordable housing. So we did when we were first drawing up ideas of what kind of properties we'd like to purchase and how we'd like our housing co-op to look. We immediately set up our aim of not using housing that would be used for these disadvantaged groups. However, in practice, this was a lot more difficult. So I think at one stage we looked at potentially converting a disused B&B into residential housing. We made the local news when we did this. Everyone was quite excited, but it took a long time to get planning permission from the local council, and in the end, someone else came and bought the property. So I think the point from this is that you're going to have to be prepared to make some compromises. And although you might have all your aims and values that you want to abide by to begin with, it's important that you understand that in the real world, sometimes things won't work out the way you expect. And in that situation, you're going to have to try and reach a middle ground and compromise just to try and get your project moving and off the ground. And I think that's important.
All right, cool. That's my bit. Thank you. So we've just got another 5 minutes left, and I'm just going to go through what the history of the group has been like and what our present looks like right now. And yeah, if you've got any questions, start to think of what those might be. Okay, it's just to go quickly through our past. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, a big part of the reason we set up was having Students for Cooperation at the beginning in 2016. I met one of the other founding members there, and that's when we started chatting about doing something like this in Brighton. In February 2018, we had our first student housing co-op in Brighton info event, and just had a bunch of people show up and start to think about what this would look like. We started meeting fortnightly from February 2018, and yeah, basically have been meeting once or twice or 3 times a month since then. In August 2018, we incorporated. So we used we incorporated with our primary rules and became a proper legal entity, a co-op. Basically, every September since September 2018, we've been at freshers fairs and volunteering fairs, housing fairs, just chatting to students on campus about what this might look like, how they can get involved, what is a co-op. Lots of people approach us asking if we have a house yet, and we say no, but we're about to have one. Do you want to join the working group? So that's the picture from September 2018. As Tom just mentioned, in August 2019, we were looking at getting a bed and breakfast. We got quite far through the planning stage, and we had a lot of positive support from local people and MPs and universities. Someone, a cash buyer, came in at the last minute and bought it, so we weren't actually able to go ahead with that. But we did have some really good discussions with the council, and they were quite keen on having a student housing co-op, which we thought was really positive. February and March 2020 is basically when we opened up a community shares offer. And when I say we, I mean Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust. So we've been supported by the local enabler hub basically from the beginning. But the Community Land Trust said, we're going to raise some money and we're going to support 3 different projects, and Seasalt's going to be the first one. Next slide, please. So yeah, just going into the present and the future of Seasalt, basically since 2020. So yeah, at the end of February, I think it was the 29th of February, we launched this share offer, which in hindsight, the best time to launch a community shares offer. We ended up restructuring it so that BHCL, Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, ended up restructuring it so it was only focused on Seasalt. So buying a house, long-term lease to Seasalt, 7+ years, and we're now agreeing a management lease between us. Obviously in March 2020, the pandemic hit, and so lots of our members kind of had other priorities, and so we had quite low capacity for a couple of months, but then in June and July we had a bunch of new lovely members joining, including Tom and Matt, and now we've got quite a vibrant group going, and we meet every 2 weeks. The community shares offer was on Ethics, a platform for ethical investment, and in November we got match funding of about £30,000, I want to say. There was some match funding from the People's Postcode Lottery, and that was sort of the point at which we realised we were gonna meet our targets. And it closed in December. It closed on the 31st of December last year, and we managed to over-raise. So we actually raised £360,000, which is really, really exciting. In the last, I think just this last week, some of our members have gone to view a local property, and we put an offer in. It's an 8-bedroom, and so we're thinking about buying a property for 8 bedrooms, and then we're modelling so that in the next 3 to 5 years we can buy a second property for another 6 people. So overall, hoping for 11 to 14 members. And that looks quite imminent. So we're hoping for a September move-in. I'm going to stop there. I can see lots of questions in the chat coming in. Yeah, so thank you everyone, and let's get to some questions.
Fantastic, thank you all very much. I just love it. I just love that kind of summary of the context as well of the housing situation. I think I don't think I've heard it that clearly put, really. And it just kind of really kind of gets you to hear the kind of situation. So we've got some time for questions. Do you want to unshare your screen, Tom?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've got Nick Small. If I bring in Nick Small first, who's the councillor in Liverpool, very keen on this. What do you think, Nick?
Excellent. I've been really looking forward to this for a long time. I did a motion last year to the City Council around exploring student housing co-ops, and the council's really done nothing with it. I'm a Labour and cooperative councillor in central Liverpool, and we've probably got about 50–60% of our residents are students. So all of these issues are things that that we know about. So we're really keen to do something on that. In another life, sort of my day job, I run a consultancy working with cooperatives and social enterprise. So I'm doing a lot of work, largely outside Liverpool, with sort of around community shares and community benefit societies and things like that. So I've got a meeting next week to start looking at some of this with a community group, and this is one of the aspects that we want to look at. I guess the question I want to ask is a technical one, but I know you've got the community land trust owning the building. And presumably you've got, is it a community benefit society as your cooperative vehicle with the community shares? It's just sort of talking through some of the legal structures and sort of what you'd use on that, and also could you use a charitable community benefit society as part of this? Would it have would this be classed as a charitable as sort of charitable activities?
Okay, so I'm going to try and remember all your questions. So yeah, just to clarify, it is Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust that will own the assets and give a long-term lease to Seasalt, and then Seasalt is responsible for allocating the members who get to live in the house. And in terms of the legal structure, Seasalt is set up as a cooperative society, and so they take on the lease. The community shares was community shares offer was run by BHCLT. I don't believe that they are a charity. I'm a bit stuck on what their legal entity status is, but I can find out and come back to you on that.
Sorry, another thing I didn't ask, if that's okay, Paul. Who are your members? Are the members the tenants, or are your members sort of anyone can be a member? The community can be a member.
Sure. Yeah. So so this will change slightly when we have a house. At the moment, the members are people in the working group. So we say that these should be students or people who have graduated in the last year. So I guess the point of that is that whilst you're a student, you can be part of this group. You can live in a house, and you can live there for a year after graduating. So you've got a bit of stability after you graduate. You're not sort of chucked out into the world. I live in a housing co-op now. I moved in just as I graduated, and I know I found it so helpful for just having somewhere to be. But in terms of who the members will be, it won't just be the community. Community members can be part of the CLT. Anyone can in the local community can pay £1 to become a member. But Seasalt is only restricted really to students and recent graduates. Yes, and BHCLT is Community Benefit Society. Thank you.
Yeah, so to be clear, Nick, it was Brighton and Hove CLT who oversaw the community share offer, working with Seasalt in partnership, and it went through them. Any other thoughts? Britt, I know you had some questions in the chat. Do you want to ask them?
Oh, it was actually the same question. I was just interested if you ever are interested in owning the asset, or if it's more about paying the lease. And I guess I was also interested if you're paying, if you're paying the lease, and with that you're paying, I guess, off the if there's a bank loan involved, that kind of stuff. But I was also interested in if you're going to move on at some point, or if you're going to stay, or how that is, for you, like, to plan that. Like, is a student co-op for students only? And I ask that because I know lots of people who still live in a co-op that they probably formed when they were really young. And I guess I sometimes ask myself, like, is that all right? Is that fair for, like, the people that come after? But yeah. that was my question, really.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I graduated a year and a month ago. It is now, and I'm still attending Seasalt meetings, but I've stepped down from being a committee member, and I'm not looking to live in the house. And so to answer your question, yeah, only proper members who fulfil that criteria will get to live in the house. We do say that members should move in. Tom and Matt, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I was just going to say our aim as a co-op is to address the problems in the student housing market. So we probably, as Sim said before, we let students sort of stay in a year after they graduate to give them some stability. But we're really trying to address that kind of university market, and where students sort of have the 3 years at university with no sort of long-term stability.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but it seems like kind of what you're raising is the dangers of stagnation, and I think that that's something that we're totally aware of, because we like to be kind of, you know, seen as an organization that cares about its members, and that is factored in within, you know, letting members stay for a year after they graduate. However, the fact is you do have to avoid that stagnation, and you do have to kind of avoid things getting that stagnation. So that's kind of, I think our policy hits a bit of a sweet spot there.
And just to add on the asset thing, I think Seasalt is probably not looking into taking on the assets and holding it themselves. That tends to be the case with most student housing co-ops. In fact, all the student housing co-ops that I can think of in this country and abroad. Just between like having such a transient membership and the responsibilities that come with paying off a mortgage, we always felt like it was best to have an intermediary. And for us, that was the local CLT. But for Birmingham Student Housing Co-op, for instance, that is Student Co-op Homes, the national body. Yeah.
And Rebecca. Mute.
It's really inspiring to see you guys doing that. I'm just wondering, like, what the plan is longer term, because my brain's sort of thinking about equity and how what I like, the reasons I would see for being part of the co-op is so that I can accrue some sort of equity, so that I'm not just sort of throwing all my money into a house which is rented and then not going to be able, like, I've just worked out very roughly how much money I've spent on rent since starting university, which was like I don't know, nearly £100,000 I've spent on rent, I would say. And like just that so I was going to be part of one co-op in York, but it's looking like a different one, but we're at some point hoping to be a part of it. The mutual home ownership model that your space is looking at, and means that it's like that in between space. It's like better than renting, but not quite as, like, in terms of equity, how much you would get from actually owning the house. I'm just thinking, like, what it is the plan with Seasalt to, like, put that equity back into making sure that there's more students can benefit from being part of a student housing co-op, or like what's the next? Because, like, you've got to be thinking about, I guess, these longer term things when you're thinking about where this money's potentially going, because I'm presuming it's not just going to Brighton and Hove CLT and then they're doing other things. So you'd sort of expect it to be rolling into next things.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. There definitely are, like, mutual home ownership models, like you say with your space. Seasalt isn't one of those, so I guess the members who are part of it, individuals don't build up that equity. You're right, it is primarily the local CLT who build equity. There would be other local housing co-ops or mutual home ownership schemes where that would happen, but I do totally see your point, and that's just not something that's not the model or the way that student housing co-ops are set up, unfortunately.
People aren't bringing, you're not bringing equity to it as an individual.
No, but is there like, but the money that people are paying as rent, does that then go into some sort of a like the next one so that it can benefit more students? It's more the question.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, not saying you would take the money back out of what you've put in, but like, is there a route for that, for the money that those students are putting in to then help the next cohort?
I think some of it is reinvested back into the current house, and then some of that will be used by the Community Land Trust to fund our second property as well. So we can provide for more students. So you're improving the quality of the current house, and you're improving the number of students that can take a place in affordable housing as well, with some of our rent. But obviously, a lot of our rent will have to go on paying off investors and paying the lease, but some of that will be reinvested back into the project, yeah.
Okay, can I just bring in Toby before we wrap up? Go on, Toby.
Hi, yeah, Manchester Student Housing Co-op.
Yay.
I'm secretary of that. Yeah, I was just wondering how did you manage kind of recruitment among the pandemic? Because we're kind of at the moment we're kind of looking to recruit new members for similar reasons that you were in summer. I was just wondering how you practically did that and how you kind of sorted through applications and stuff.
I mean, so basically, I joined after I saw things on social media. So having a strong social media presence, particularly because you're going to be dealing with students, helps you attract people. Try and get advertisement around sort of local societies at the university or through the students' union if you can, because they have quite a big presence. We also had on our website, we had like a joining form that people could sign, so that immediately sends us an email and a message which we can then reply to. Yeah, and just generally try and run effective social media campaigns would be the main thing. I don't know if Sim or Matt have any other suggestions.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Tom said, I joined during the pandemic. I joined simply off of it being listed as something on my university's career hub. But recently, I'd have to say, and Tom's not going to say anything about it because he's far too humble, but we've really, made efforts to ramp up our social media in terms of graphic design and little kind of topical Instagram posts we've gone for quite recently on kind of facts about student housing, because at the end of the day, we want this to be something that is accessible to as many people as possible. And if you can create as wide a base as possible for people who understand your vision, understand kind of what you're bringing to the table, and they're able to relate to it, then you're going to get as positive a reaction as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. Just to clarify, Career Hub is like the place where students look for jobs or volunteering opportunities or internships, that sort of thing. So that's, I guess, a place where students are looking, because being part of the Student Housing Co-op is quite a commitment. Setting it up as a volunteering opportunity, I guess, has helped. And just generally, I think, speaking to similar campaigns across the local universities, there are people there who'd be interested, and we got some members through there. Yeah, that's all I'd say. Really, good luck with it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would just
You're on
like
mute,
to
sorry.
I'd just like to thank you all very much. I really appreciate you spending time with us this hour. It is a fantastic story, and in some ways I'm quite shocked that we haven't got a student housing co-op in Liverpool, but we will do everything we can to rectify that, and particularly working with Councillor Small as well. And just the inspiration that you give, I think, is fantastic. So I really, really appreciate your time, and let's show our appreciation for you all. Brilliant. So thank you very much. We've got a 6 o'clock with Granby 4 Streets. It's just a roller coaster of a festival, hey? But thank you very much for your time and your contributions. It was great.
Thank
you. Thanks,
Paul.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Cheers, appreciate it.
Thanks all. Bye.